Welcome back everybody to the retrograde right here on Dead Jester Cinema. What is the retrograde? Well, I'm going to go through an old movie, and then when it's all done, I'm going to break that movie down into 4 categories: plot, characters, direction, and music. And I will assign a letter grade to each of those categories, and then when it's all done, I combine those grades to come up with one cumulative score and grade for the entire film. And on this edition of the retrograde, we're going to go back to Children of the Corn for Children of the Corn 666, The Return of Isaac. Now this is one of the ones that I saw when I was younger. I remember renting it because I'm such a big fan of the original that I figured, well, Isaac's back, maybe it has to be good, right? The film opens up on a pretty moody credit sequence, after which a nondescript boy is murdered, but more on that later. We then meet Hannah, a young woman traveling home to her birthplace, Gatlin, Nebraska, to uncover mysteries about her past and, oh, for f***'s sake, look, we got some leftover mountains from Children of the Corn 5. Is it really hard to film in a location with no mountains in it? Like, oh, I don't know, Nebraska? Anyway, on her way into Gatlin, she picks up a stranded preacher and agrees to drive him into town. It's not long into the ride when the conversation starts getting a little weird and the preacher pulls a Houdini on Hannah, and then she ends up waking up alone, stranded, in the middle of a cornfield. This film does this a lot, where it sets up that Hannah is having these visions, but there is ultimately no satisfying payoff to them, and they only come off as being more intrusive than they do actually setting up anything meaningful. They're just used to create a really shitty attempt at a jump scare. Hannah is then greeted by Officer Lady, who tells her she needs to be checked out by a doctor because... And when Hannah suggests the local hospital in Gatlin, Officer Lady is all, no you didn't. But after checking her name, she has a suspicious change of heart and is all, you know what, on second thought, a trip to the hospital sounds fun. Let's go. Once there, she is examined by a doctor, and when she asks what happened to the kids in town, the examination turns super creepy, and he tells her that she needs to leave town, which she obviously doesn't, and while snooping around, she encounters Mr. Crazy Guy cliché, who chases her around the hospital and, holy shit! Dude just straight up teleported, did you see that? Like, look, I'm not even kidding, look. Dude was in the stairwell, and not even a couple seconds later, he's behind this door. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, dude just straight up snatches Hannah and forces her into a room where, lying in a bed in a coma, is Isaac! Wait, hold up. Am I missing something here? Wasn't he, like, burned alive at the end of the first movie by those really shitty 80s special effects and then possessed? I mean, I've heard of time healing all wounds, but this is a little ridiculous. Anyway, Isaac's strong hand starts getting all twitchy because of her presence, and when she touches him, he snaps out of his coma, and she backs out of the room and nothing happens. Like, seriously, nothing happens. He even goes back to being catatonic. Well, she does back out into the hallway right into Gabriel, a young man who supposedly works at the hospital. The two briefly flirt as Hannah leaves the hospital, and after she leaves, Officer Lady asks Gabriel why he didn't tell her about whatever, and Gabriel says she must find out on her own according to the prophecy or some dumb shit. The prophecy is a bit of a muddled mess, and it tries to come back around later in the movie to make sense, but it really doesn't. So anyway, Hannah is driving home, and in a brilliant piece of editing, a truck just appears completely out of thin air and tries to run her off the road. Like, seriously, what the f***? Did this just turn into Fast and the Furious all of a sudden? The chase comes to an abrupt end, with Hannah pulling into a local shithouse motel, where she gets booked a room she didn't ask for by this bitch armed with a snarky 90s attitude. Meanwhile, Isaac wakes up out of his vegetative state and, okay, just forget that scene, I guess. So Hannah gets in her car and, oh, for f***'s sake, we're back to this? Oh my god, can this movie please make up its mind on what it wants to do? Because it's seriously giving me whiplash. And yeah, I'm shocked at your appearance too, Isaac. You're not the only one. Police Lady informs Isaac that he's been Rip Van Winkling for 19 years and that he has a son and she's been preparing him or some dumb shit. Hannah is then assaulted by terrible editing where Isaac appears and says some crap about destiny or I don't know. And look at Isaac trying to be scary and creepy with a walker. Give me a break. Anyway, she snaps out of it and runs into Gabriel, and when asked what she's really doing there, Hannah says she's looking for her mother. Because remember that this movie is trying to have a plot, so while the two are digging through the old town birth records, crazy guy appears out of nowhere and tries to kill Hannah with an axe.
What the hell are you doing? You don't go sneaking up on people like that, Jake.
Don't sneak up on people like that? How about don't try to murder people like that, for f***'s sake? Gabriel leads crazy guy away, and Hannah finds her birth certificate conveniently pinned to the wall. I know it says a different name on there, but trust me, it's her. Oh look, more shitty editing. Hannah is woken up by an intruder, and when they leave, she takes a peep and sees it's the person in the truck that tried to run her off the road earlier. So she follows that truck to a cemetery through a night-to-day transition, and I mean, it's not like Gatlin is a huge town, so I guess in order to warrant this brilliant transition, they must have done circles around the city limits for a couple hours, but whatever. It's here that thanks to some random kid, she learns the truck belongs to Rachel Colby, her mother. Which raises all sorts of questions as to why her own mother tried to run her off the road earlier. Police lady then shows up, and her and Rachel leave the cemetery, and Hannah goes over to the grave where she saw her mother leave the flowers, and the grave is of baby Colby, which is in fact her. God. So later on, back at her motel room, Hannah is left a love note in the shower, and when Gabriel shows up, the two... damn it! You know, just because you can edit doesn't mean that you should. Isaac has a one-on-one with Rachel about the thought of her dead daughter returning to fulfill the prophecy, which is to lead the next generation of corn kids, or something. Isaac then questions Rachel on why she turned her back on him, and she says that it's because of his teachings and her husband was murdered and her dreams of a family were ruined. Rachel. Oh, yeah, that's right, the priestess chick from the first movie. This is supposed to be her? Wow, her views on the cult sure did change. Kinda like the actress that now plays the character in this movie. Later, Rachel confesses to Dr. Creepy her worry about Hannah returning and Isaac's prophecy coming true. So he tries to calm her by telling her nothing is going to happen, and that if she is so worried about her daughter, that she needs to go talk to her. In the next scene, Isaac shows up and accuses the doctor of his involvement of taking Hannah away from him when she was just a baby. So he does what anybody would. He kills him. After that, Matt shows up to meet with Isaac, who is revealed to be his father, and that in order for his prophecy to come true, Matt must father a child with Hannah. So all this rigmarole is just to simply get a girl knocked up? I mean, I get it from a plot perspective, but there are a lot easier ways to go about it than this. Later, Isaac and Gabriel are having a lovely Tuesdays with Maury chat out in a cornfield where Isaac explains his visions of a perfect world, and even goes as far as to compare himself to the likes of Gandhi and Jesus Christ. And when Gabriel makes the obvious comparison to both him and Jesus being nailed to a cross, Isaac gets all super serial and is like, dude, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. And honestly, let me say this right now that John Franklin is a welcome return to this franchise. I know it makes absolutely no sense for him to be here, but just his presence alone I think helps what very little this movie has going on. I mean, you can't polish a turd, it is what it is, but at least that turd doesn't smell as bad. Yet. So Hannah is driving to Hemingford to meet her mom when shit goes fast and furious once again. Only this time it's Isaac's son Matt who runs her off the road, only to hand her a shovel and be like, go dig up your past, or whatever. Which she immediately does by digging up the grave of Rachel's dead baby. When lo and behold, look who shows up, Rachel. And she shows up to try to stop Hannah, but Hannah doesn't want to listen and she opens the casket anyway, finding it empty. And then the two get into a mother-daughter argument that's straight out of a Lifetime movie. I do really appreciate what this movie is trying to do, but all of this just goes over like a wet fart. Meanwhile, Isaac's prophecy party is getting underway as he brands his son with the mark of the Chosen. Okay. All this is going on conveniently as Hannah is just wandering through the cornfield for whatever fucking reason, and then she gets surrounded and drugged and kidnapped and branded as well. But before Isaac can complete the ceremony, Hannah makes a break for it through the cornfield, just as Rachel shows up to call out Isaac on his bullshit, and he's all, not this chick again. Hannah is assisted in her escape by Matt's girlfriend, but the two aren't so lucky as they are eventually cornered and taken back to Isaac. Well, at least one of them is. Hannah was rescued by Gabriel and taken away. And when Isaac finds out about this, he gets super, super mad.
Idiot.
That has got to be one of the weakest slaps I have ever seen on film. I mean, seriously, I bet fruit flies can slap harder than that.
Yeah, there it is. Slapped you.
Isaac then tells his son to kill his traitorous girlfriend, but when he fails to do so, Isaac takes matters into his own hands because, you know, if you want something done right, you just gotta do it yourself.
Finish her. Fatality. Flawless victory.
Meanwhile, at their barn safe house, Hannah and Gabriel take this moment of downtime to literally get down and get familiar with each other on a biblical level. Perfect timing too, because you know it's not like there's some crazy murder cult right out there trying to hunt you down. No, just keep doing what you're doing. Don't let me stop you. And I'm sorry, but there is absolutely no way that water in that hose is anything but ice cold. Plus, what an amazingly non-sexy place to screw in. I mean, nothing says sensual like all that hay soaked in horse piss and cow shit. Lovely. And after all that pointless f***ing, Isaac's son Matt comes stumbling in drunk, saying they aren't out of the woods yet and that the prophecy is still on. Hannah and Gabriel leave to go find Hannah's mother Rachel, but before Gabe leaves the barn, he convinces Matt to commit seppuku with a scythe. I mean, this scene is dumb enough, but it's made absolutely worse by the shitty rock music that they have playing over it. So yeah, he dies. Blood in, blood out, I guess. As Hannah returns to the hospital where all this literal shit began to confront Isaac in the bowels of a boiler room that looks like it's straight out of Nightmare on Elm Street. And this is where Isaac more or less says that he's the one with all the power, not he who walks behind the rose, and then it's time for her and him to get busy making their master race. Meanwhile, elsewhere, random kid shows up to reap him some Gabriel, but it doesn't work out too well for him.
Ooh, watch yourself, it's the claw! Ooh, the claw's coming at you. Ooh, you're scared of the claw.
So then Police Lady tries her luck, but Gabriel uses the Jedi mind trick and forces her to shoot herself in the head. And it's here at the end that Gabriel reveals himself to be the human embodiment of he who walks behind the rose. And Hannah is knocked up with his stupid seed. And this is where the movie officially goes off the rails, because you know, up to this point, it hasn't been too awful. You know, it's been kind of teetering a little bit, but it's never gone over that edge. But from this point on, from this revelation till the end of the movie, it just falls over, tips over, and falls down a gorge of embarrassment. Starting first with Gabriel making Isaac dance like a puppet. Then he pins Isaac to the floor in a familiar pose and hovers above him doing some kind of Jim Carrey game show dumbass shit. I don't know. It's just god awful. Anyway, he kills Isaac for a second time, and on their way out, Rachel guts Gabriel with a sickle, killing him just like we saw at the beginning of the movie. And whoops, my bad, I guess not, I guess he's still alive. But he only pops back to life for a second in order to utter a stupid line before blowing the place up. And the film ends on a slow-mo awful cliffhanger with Hannah and Rachel leaving town with their unborn baby, and once again it's a plot point that is completely dropped in the next film. And that was Children of the Corn 6, and honestly it's not as god-awful terrible as I remembered it being, but at the same time it is miles, and I mean miles, away from being anything close to decent. So let's just throw this thing on over to the retrograder and let's get this thing graded. The plot gets a D-. Once again, it's nothing remarkable, and much like every other film in the franchise, it bears little to no connection to any of the previous films that came directly before it. However, this one is distinct in that it's the only sequel that actually resembles a true follow-up to the original. But even then, there are still quite a few inconsistencies between this and the original, most notably being Isaac in a coma. When the last time we saw him, he was burnt to a crisp and possessed, yet somehow that's never addressed in this one, and he looks perfectly fine. Plus, there's little to no clarification as to how Isaac can still lead these children as like a damn near 40-year-old man, because the whole point and premise to the original movie and to the original concept of Children of the Corn was that adults can't be trusted. I mean, I don't know, unless Isaac has some sort of contractual loophole with He Who Walks Behind the Rose, so he's able to go about all this. It's never really clearly addressed, so in regards to this, your guess is about as good as mine. As for the bulk of this movie, I don't mind the plot of Hannah being part of Isaac's prophecy of a new generation of corn children being led by her offspring or whatever, but where the film collapses in on itself is during that revealing of Gabriel as the human embodiment of He Who Walks Behind the Rose, and that by him screwing Hannah, he fulfills his own prophecy. I know it's all tied into the whole firstborn son and firstborn daughter of the original children getting together, getting busy, and getting down to procreate to create this whole master race, but he just swoops in at the last minute and says, well, no, your son's not the original son or the first son, it's me, which, okay? It all just happens so fast and with no clarification that it ultimately just kind of falls flat and makes no sense. And I ultimately never felt the power struggle, or ultimately got the power struggle, between Isaac and He Who Walks Behind the Rose, because it's not, in my opinion, properly fleshed out enough. And I think that plays into my overall problems with the plot itself. It presents a lot of interesting ideas, but with little to no payoff to them, and I can't get invested in what's going on. So the story just kind of meanders along until it's over. And that is even after jumping through all the hoops that you need to jump through in order for this film to make sense back to the original. The characters get a D. There aren't any real characters or performances that are absolutely terrible, but there's none that really stand out at all either. The main character, Hannah, is okay. The character itself is very one-dimensional, which is nothing new for these types of films, but she is acted fairly well for the most part, and the actress Natalie Ramsey does what she can with what little there is to work with. The only thing I ever found annoying was that weird sort of visions she would have, as they really don't amount to much of anything except for attempts at cheap scares. Rachel the mom as a character is pretty boring, and in my opinion, she's acted equally as boring. And I do think it's a real shame they didn't get the actress back from the original to reprise her role. Not like it would have really helped at all, but it would have been nice to see. But the two low points of this movie in terms of the characters come in the form of police lady Cora and Gabriel. Cora as a character isn't terrible, she's just acted really, really poorly. Especially in the beginning where she meets Hannah. I mean, you watch her and you find yourself going, what the hell is she doing? And in other scenes, I don't know if she's trying to be creepy or intimidating, but whatever it is, it just comes off looking really, really silly. Whereas Gabriel is the opposite, because for most of the movie, I don't feel like he's acted necessarily that bad. He's just written really, really cliche. Plus, the revelation of him being the embodiment of He Who Walks Behind the Rose just further destroys that character and adds to the overall confusion of the plot. Plus, it's a revelation so bad that it also brings down the quality of the film itself for me. And it is here where his acting does take a steep nosedive. The arrogant bravado he was going for just looks like a smarmy, shitty game show host, and it's awful. But if I had to pick one lone standout, it has to be John Franklin returning as Isaac. Even though he's like 15 years older at this point, he still has that presence about him that does carry most of the weight of this movie. I mean, he probably is the one sole reason that you put this movie on in the first place, because he is so iconic to Children of the Corn. And while he does bring some gravitas to the movie, it's not enough to move that needle either way in terms of the movie or the story, which it's also a story he helped write, by the way, so take that for what it's worth. The direction also gets a D. I thought the direction of this film was decent enough, and I mean that's comparatively speaking to the rest of the franchise. Like, it's not anywhere near as awful as the direction in Fields of Terror, and it's certainly not even close to the direction of the original movie. It's kind of somewhere in between. For the first time since maybe the third movie, this one actually has an atmosphere to it. Nothing great, mind you, but it's still there. I do really like the use of lighting in certain scenes, but I do have to say that the constant orangey golden hour shots are just too much. I mean, there are other times of day that you can film, not just dawn, dusk, or night. And something tells me that they really filtered the hell out of these scenes too, which most films do that in order to achieve a desired look. But they went ham here when they probably didn't need to. Plus, there are some less than stellar shot choices too, as well as some really bizarre jump cuts in the edit that jar you out of place. And plus, we also get the glorious return of the abused Dutch tilts, which, you heard me rant about that in the last one. The music gets a C- because it's okay for the most part, except for the parts where they cut in with the stereotypical 90s industrial alternative rock. But honestly, I think it's by far the best sounding music in the franchise since probably the original, or maybe even the third. It has sort of the feel and tonality of the original at times, but where I think it drags is that it also leans really heavily on the Dimension Films stock horror music in certain scenes as well, which hurts the overall grade of the music and really kind of cheapens it in those certain moments. But overall, it's okay. With those 4 grades combined, that brings the cumulative score up to a 65%, which means that Children of the Corn 666, The Return of Isaac, gets an overall grade of a D. Children of the Corn 666 is a frustrating exercise in sort of interesting ideas being let down by shitty writing. I'm not trying to excuse the mental gymnastics you have to go through in order for those ideas to make sense connecting back to the original, but I mean, if this was the route they're going to go, then so be it. But everything past that in the plot that is set up is just left to wither and die on the vine. Plus, it's a poor time capsule of its time, with everything from the production design to the inclusion of random shitty music to the direction. John Franklin is a welcome return, but his efforts are in vain, even as a writer, as the Children of the Corn ship is just about sunk, and not even a Hail Mary from this series icon of Isaac is enough to keep this thing afloat. So yeah, that was Children of the Corn 6, and holy Christ, coming off of Children of the Corn 5, I legit thought that this one was going to be even worse, but maybe because that one was such crap that, you know, it kind of helped this one a little bit, because this one didn't seem as bad as that one, but it was still pretty bad. So, you know, maybe I've just gotten desensitized to this franchise and it's just beaten me down so much that my level of expectations are like freaking dinosaur bones in the ground level high at this point. But anyways, if you have seen it, what have you guys thought about Children of the Corn 666? Please leave your comments and your opinions below, and leave your grades as well. Would you have graded it higher than I did? Would you have graded it lower? Did you like seeing John Franklin back as Isaac? I kind of did, even though, you know, he's like 40 years old and he just looks out of place. Like I said, it was still fun to see him reprise his role. So, anyways, leave all your comments below. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. Adios, and now, GTFO!